The Aegean wind carried the smell of smoke and salt. The sky above the islands was grey with ash, and the waters below churned with the reflection of fire. On the horizon, the Persian fleet appeared, hundreds of ships gliding like shadows across the sea, black sails swallowing the sunlight. At their head stood Xerxes, king of kings, the man who commanded the largest army the world had ever seen. He had come not only to conquer Greece, but to humiliate it, to burn its temples, enslave its people, and shatter its pride. Behind his gold and jewels was a vengeance that stretched back to his father, Darius, whose defeat at Marathon still haunted the Persian throne. Xerxes had sworn that Greece would pay, and that no city, no man, no woman would be spared. When the Persian army landed, the ground trembled beneath the weight of hundreds of thousands. They marched through Thrace and Macedonia like a tide of iron. Villages fell silent before their approach. Farmers abandoned their fields. Mothers gathered their children and fled to the mountains, whispering prayers to gods who had already turned away. The Persians were not simply an army, they were a moving empire. Soldiers, servants, slaves, and courtesans followed the march, carrying the wealth of Asia behind them. And wherever they went, they left the land hollow and broken. In the city of Eretria, the fires began. Women were dragged from their homes, their faces covered, their cries lost in the chaos. Those who resisted were cut down. Those who surrendered were taken, their fates sealed by the whims of soldiers who believed themselves instruments of a divine king. The temples of Artemis and Athena were looted, the statues toppled, the priests slaughtered. For Xerxes, it was justice. For Greece, it was the beginning of a nightmare. The Persian king was a man of contradictions, a ruler of unmatched wealth and cruelty, a god in his own mind, and yet a man easily wounded by pride. As he watched his soldiers burn cities that had stood for centuries, he smiled. He believed he was not destroying Greece, but remaking it. Every Greek woman taken as a concubine, every girl enslaved, every mother made to kneel before the empire, all of it was, to him, the rightful consequence of defiance. And when his armies reached Athens, the city that had defied his father, his vengeance reached its most terrifying shape. The Athenians had fled, abandoning their homes, their statues, their sacred altars. Only the old, the poor, and the desperate remained. When the Persians entered, the streets echoed with silence. But Xerxes ordered no mercy. His soldiers swept through the city, tearing down the symbols of Greek pride. The Parthenon, not yet complete, became a ruin of ash and broken marble. Women were taken from their hiding places and herded to the Acropolis, where the king's officers chose them one by one. The chronicles never described their faces, only their fates. They were sent east to the heart of the empire to serve as offerings to the will of Persia. Some became servants, others concubines. None ever returned. If you wish to uncover more stories like this, stories buried beneath centuries of glory and silence, then subscribe to the channel and like this video, because history is not always the tale of heroes. Sometimes it is the echo of those who are never allowed to speak. As Xerxes watched Athens burn from his golden throne set atop the hill, he felt nothing but triumph. His soldiers sang songs of conquest, while the women of Greece wept in the shadows. To him they were spoils, reminders of victory, living trophies of a fallen civilization. But what he could not see was that his cruelty had already begun to forge something far more dangerous than fear: defiance. In Sparta and Athens, in the mountain villages and island coves, the stories spread. Word of what Xerxes had done to the women of Greece lit a fire in the hearts of the survivors. The rage of the conquered became the rallying cry of the free. When the Greeks spoke of vengeance, they no longer spoke for pride, but for the nameless, for the wives and daughters taken, for the mothers who had watched their homes burn, and that fury would follow Xerxes like a shadow all the way to the Straits of Salamis. But in that moment, beneath the smoke of a burning Athens, the King of Kings believed himself untouchable. He saw the Greek women as symbols of his triumph, offerings to his throne, proof that his power extended even into the hearts of the conquered. What Xerxes did not understand was that empires built on humiliation always collapse under their own arrogance. For every city he destroyed, another would rise against him. For every woman he enslaved, another would give her sons to fight. And as the fires of Athens faded, so too began the unravelling of the empire that once called itself eternal. The smoke of Athens drifted slowly toward the sea, a black veil curling above the charred rooftops, spreading over the waters where the Persian fleet waited like a restless serpent. Xerxes, seated upon a golden throne overlooking the devastation, watched the city smoulder with the same calm one might reserve for a harvest well reaped. To him it was not destruction, but purification. He believed that every brick shattered and every voice silenced was a hymn to his power. That Greece's suffering was proof that the gods had chosen him above all kings. Yet what he could not see in that rising smoke was the quiet endurance of those he had crushed, the beginning of a defiance that would outlive his empire and turn his triumph into ash. When the flames finally subsided, the Persian army filled the streets of the ruined city, and the temples that once echoed with prayers now echoed with weeping. The women who survived were rounded up, their names never written, their faces never remembered. Some were taken as trophies by generals and officers, others were bound in silence and carried eastward, their fates sealed before the journey began. For Xerxes, this was not cruelty, but justice. He saw the women of Greece as the living proof of his father's vengeance, the embodiment of Persia's victory over the land that had once dared to humiliate them at Marathon. As the long march back to Asia began, the captives followed the procession of soldiers, servants and slaves, stretching across the land like a living river of conquest. When they reached the shores of the Hellespont, the same waters Xerxes had once lashed with chains for daring to defy his bridge, the women were forced aboard ships that carried them toward the heart of the empire. Their tears mingled with the sea, their cries swallowed by the sound of oars striking water. In their silence, they bore witness to the arrogance of a king who believed the world itself could be owned. Weeks later, the court of Persia celebrated their king's return. In Susa and Persepolis, the palaces blazed with gold, their pillars carved with the likeness of divine kings and winged guardians. The new captives from Greece were brought before the court as offerings to royal favour, their pale faces and foreign tongues regarded with fascination and scorn. They were dressed in silks they did not understand, their hair perfumed with oils from lands they would never see again, their lives rewritten as ornaments in the empire's theatre of supremacy. Some served as attendants in the queen's palace, others vanished into the harem where the air was heavy with secrecy. There, behind jewelled screens and guarded corridors, their days were measured not by freedom or choice, but by obedience. They lived among women from every conquered land, Babylonians, Egyptians, Lydians, all bound by the same invisible chain, all ghosts of the cities Persia had devoured. They spoke in whispers of home, trading fragments of memory, like treasures smuggled beneath the eye of the empire. But even within this gilded prison, the memory of Greece refused to die. The women taught their children the songs of their homeland, sang of white temples and blue seas, of mountains that defied the horizon, and of gods who might yet remember them. In those whispered lullabies, the essence of Greece survived, carried not by armies or kings, but by those the world called conquered. Yet even as Xerxes revelled in his victory, the shadow of his deeds followed him. The fires he had lit across Greece burned not only in temples, but in the hearts of those who survived. News of his cruelty reached the islands and mountains, carried by refugees and merchants, told in hushed voices by men who had seen too much. The Greeks spoke of their enslaved women, not as lost, but as martyrs of the homeland, and in their memory, the spirit of resistance was reborn. When the Greeks gathered again, Spartans hardened by discipline, Athenians forged in loss, they no longer fought only for pride or for gods, but for those taken from them. The defilement of their homes and the suffering of their women became the rallying cry that united them in defiance. Their resolve was not born of vengeance alone, but of dignity, the will to prove that freedom could not be extinguished by fear. And so when Xerxes' fleet met the Greeks again in the narrow waters of Salamis, it was not an army he faced, but a nation reborn from ruin. The Persians came with overwhelming might, their ships stretching across the sea like a dark horizon of power. Yet the Greeks waited in silence, guided by the memory of everything they had lost. When the battle began, the straits echoed not only with the clash of oars and blades, but with the fury of a people who fought for those whose voices had been stolen. Xerxes watched from the shore as the chaos unfolded. His throne, built upon the cliffs, offered him the perfect view of disaster. One by one his ships were crushed, his sailors thrown into the sea, his victory dissolving before his eyes. The waters that he had once believed to obey him now devoured his empire's pride. The god king of Persia sat frozen as his army fell apart, the cries of the dying carried by the same wind that once carried the screams of Athens. When the sea finally grew still, Xerxes turned his back on Greece. His march home was slower, quieter, shadowed by defeat. The once celebrated conqueror was now a man hollowed by the cost of his ambition. He returned to Susa not as a god, but as a mortal weighed down by ghosts. The palaces that had once shimmered with celebration now seemed cold and cavernous. The music of victory had faded. Only the echo of memory remained. Within those marble halls, the women from Greece still served, their presence now an unbearable reminder of the empire's shame. Their beauty, once paraded as proof of Persia's supremacy, had become a reflection of all that Xerxes had lost. Some chroniclers whispered that the king grew withdrawn, that he began to dream of the sea, of waves laced with fire and faces that would not fade. History, written by those who served him, would later polish his reign in gold, celebrating his grandeur and his monumental works. But beneath those words lies a silence shaped by those who were never asked to tell their story. The women of Greece, nameless in the chronicles, left no monuments, no inscriptions, yet their endurance carved a legacy deeper than stone. They were the unseen architects of defiance, the living proof that even under the weight of empires, memory cannot be destroyed. What Xerxes did to them was more than conquest. It was an attempt to erase an entire people by breaking their spirit. Yet through those very acts of cruelty, he ensured the opposite. For every woman he silenced, 1,000 stories arose to condemn him. For every city he burned, a generation of poets and warriors rose to reclaim its name. In the centuries that followed, as Persia faded into dust and Greece gave birth to legends that would shape the world, Xerxes' empire became a cautionary tale. His arrogance, his hunger, his cruelty all became the marks of a ruler who believed himself eternal and was forgotten by time. But the story of the women he tried to erase endured, carried by the words of historians, the songs of poets, and the conscience of history itself. So when we speak of Xerxes, we must not speak only of his golden palaces or his vast armies, but of those who suffered in their shadow. The women who crossed the sea in chains, the mothers who vanished into the desert, the daughters who sang of home until their voices faded into myth. They are the true witnesses of his reign. And perhaps in that quiet endurance, they achieved what no army ever could. They defeated oblivion. If this story made you rethink the way history glorifies kings and forgets the conquered, then subscribe to the channel and like this video. Because behind every empire there lies a silence. And every time we tell the truth, that silence breaks, one story at a time.